Black people are at risk from police no matter what color. Black, white, brown. You talk to African Americans, they'll tell you it doesn't matter. There's this pervasive view from law enforcement that if you're black, you're dangerous.
Watch as tensions explode when Piers Morgan openly mocks Amar Nateen on live television. In a heated exchange over the tragic death of Tyree Nichols, Piers dismisses Amar's claims of systemic racism and internalized bias among black police officers, ridiculing the idea of black white supremacists.
For me personally, this is about an abuse of power and a disregard of human life, and those individuals need to be accountable for their actions. That I need to
Don't disagree. What's it got to do with racism and white supremacy?
So
why are white people responsible for this?
Okay, so people could also argue that this is due to internalized racism, which is a byproduct of societal or institutional racism, also referred to as white supremacy.
So black police officers become white supremacist racists who kill black people because they work in an atmosphere of white supremacy. Is that it?
I can explain it a little bit better. Okay, so anti-blackness is baked into society here and in the US, and black people are not impervious to that. And so what people fail to realise...
So black people are anti-black?
Yep, this exactly. So let me explain it. I know it's very confusing.
Nonsense.
So let me explain it, Piers. So what people fail to realise is that when black people have to contend with racism, they can end up internalising it. And that can result in low self-esteem, self-loathing, and rejection of one's community. And when you combine those feelings, which as we know are also referred to as unconscious bias, when you have those feelings and they are compounded by hierarchy and power, it can lead to an individual abusing said power and projecting their self-hate onto another. And this is why, in my opinion, why we see black and white police officers killing more black people than we do white. Reason why is because of racism, which includes internalized racism, Piers.
Right. I think that's complete nonsense.
You would, because you're a white man and you don't understand.
Exactly, I'm white, therefore my skin colour means I have...
Because you don't have the lived experience.
My skin colour means I have nothing to do with it. All right, well, let me go to a black man and see if he's allowed to have a view. Zuby, what's your view?
I think that any attempt to put the blame on this in any way, shape, or form on racism or white supremacy or white people in general is absolutely ridiculous. I also think it's pretty degrading because this sort of idea stems from the notion that black people, black men, black women, that we do not have full agency and responsibility and therefore accountability for our actions and our words. We end up in these ridiculous situations where no matter the permutation, no matter what happens, even if there's not a single white person involved in the situation, in the Memphis police force, even the police chief is a black woman. The large percentage of the force is black, and people are still trying to lean on this white supremacy is the answer and the reason for everything. And honestly, it's lame. And as someone who's lived my entire life as a black male, certainly I've never been possessed by this sort of phantom of white supremacy that's made me want to attack anybody, let alone another black person. And I think that we need to put the blame and responsibility squarely on the individuals who were involved in this.
I completely agree.
It's tragic that this young man died.
Zuby shares a clear and positive view in the debate. He believes that instead of always blaming racism or white supremacy, we should look at the actions of the people involved. Zuby thinks everyone, no matter their skin color, is responsible for what they do. He says that it's important to focus on the choices people make and hold them accountable for their behavior. His opinion helps us think more carefully about each situation. We'd have making the conversation about justice and fairness better and more helpful.
I completely agree. I mean, just to note some statistics about the Memphis Police Department, that 65% of Memphis population is black. 58% of the entire police force in Memphis is black. The police chief was a black woman, right? And so on and so on. So you take all that in totality, you think, well, okay, well, where is this institutionalized white supremacy coming from, given the institution is actually served predominantly by black people for a population that is predominantly black as well? So I don't get that point. The second point I make is this. I think there's a wider issue here. The demonization of the police in America, calling them all a bunch of vile racists, has led to many older, experienced, good police officers who are not vile racists, quitting the force all over the country. And as a result, in Memphis, for example, they had a massive reduction, 20% between 2011 and 2017 of police officers. 20% went from the force. And so to try and restore the numbers, they made it easier to become a police officer. They reduced the restrictions, reduced the qualifications. 2 of the 5 officers involved in killing this poor young man went through that process in that period of not being required to have the same sort of qualifications that they used to join the Memphis Police Department. So you have a bunch of people being brought in who are poorly trained, who are not qualified to do the job, who end up committing this kind of crime. That has nothing to do with racism and white supremacy. That has everything to do, I think, with perhaps an over-demonized force in general, with a lot of bad apples in it, but over-demonized force leading to many people quitting and being replaced with people just not up to the job.
I think it's, well, everything that you said I don't disagree with. I think it's not about conflating the two things. It's just about presenting a different perspective, an alternative perspective that should be considered, because internal racism is a real thing, so therefore it should be considered.
You just heard a black man, in a very considered way, say that basically you're talking nonsense.
No, so
the idea that you
so
can
I'll ask that. So Zubi, do you believe that internal racism is nonsense? Do you believe that black people cannot internalize racism? Do you believe that?
I don't believe that it's completely impossible.
Okay.
I don't think it's impossible for
you heard that, right?
I don't think it's impossible for a person of any race or ethnicity to harbor hatred or animosity towards people who may look like them or share some things in common. What I completely disagree with is the idea that in every single one of these situations, that no matter what happens, we just jump to white supremacy is the problem. We've seen this happen many, many times.
And I agree with you.
And I think one of the biggest issues with it is, I think one of the biggest issues as well is it's actually a distraction from a very important conversation, which Piers was leaning into there, which is that when it comes to the police in the USA and also in other countries, there's clearly an issue of character, qualifications,
and prejudice.
Training. I don't know exactly. Yeah, and
prejudice is the foundation for all forms of discrimination, including sexism, misogyny, racism, and the list goes on. So if you have not dealt with your prejudice within an institution, it will manifest in your racism. That's a fact. That's a fact.
You're talking over.
That's a fact.
I think
I'm
making a good point. But secondly, you're bringing in prejudice, bigotry, racism, none of which had anything to do with this particular incident.
What are you talking about? I just explained to you internal racism, which is based off of prejudice.
It had nothing to do with why these thugs
And I said it should be considered. I said it should be considered.
Well, let Zubi finish the point you were making.
Okay, even following on from that point, I'd also say this is mind reading as well. So even trying to bring racism into this conversation, let's say these guys did not have guns and badges. Let's say this was just a group of random thugs, 5 black men beating up another black man. Even in that situation, even outside the police force, I've still seen situations where people try to blame this somehow on this specter of white supremacy. And as I've said, frankly, it's embarrassing.
Zubi and Piers share a strong and thoughtful opinion in the debate about police actions and racism. They believe it is better to focus on what people do as individuals instead of always blaming things like white supremacy whenever something bad happens involving black people. Zubi thinks that everyone, no matter their skin color, should be responsible for their own actions. He feels that always blaming something like white supremacy takes away from the importance of holding each person accountable for what they do. Piers agrees with Zubi and adds that talking about race all the time can make things more divided and create more problems. He argues that constantly making these incidents about race can cause more fights and stop people from having helpful conversations. Piers believes in a colorblind approach, which means looking at what people do, not what race they are. This way, everyone is treated fairly and equally, focusing on their actions rather than their skin color. Their view encourages a different way of thinking about justice and fairness in how the police and others act. By not always talking about race, Zubi and Piers believe we can have more balanced and positive conversations. They think this could help bring people together, lower racial tensions, and create a more peaceful society. Their ideas ask people to look at the actions of each person and make sure everyone is held accountable, helping to build a fairer system for everyone, no matter who they are.